welcome you all to the next edition of PolicyCast. Today with us, Professor Santhosh Kumar. He is currently serving the Dean of School of Liberal Arts and Management Studies. He has been a professor of politics. He specializes in public policy, public administration, and development politics, and has wide-ranging experience in teaching, training, monitoring, and evaluation from the grassroots to policy advocacy. As a specialist in the field of public policy, he has been engaged with social accountability mechanisms in service delivery context, community-based monitoring, evaluations, decentralization, and good government policy. He has been involved with the public administration structure and have worked on many projects in poverty reduction programs, particularly in South Asian countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and in India. He has worked in states like Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh. He has also worked with World Bank, UNDP, ADP, and many other entities. Good morning, sir. It's our pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Aditya, and it's my pleasure to be on this particular platform, and thank you so much for inviting me to share my views on this very topical subject, actually very fresh from the oven, so I'm sure everybody would love to hear everybody's opinion on such an important topic. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure, sir. We will be really blessed to have you with us on this NEP 2020 topic. So we will directly move on to the questions then.
Yes. So let me address it this way. Let us begin with a disclaimer that this is still the policy intention. It has been approved by the cabinet day for yesterday, and it will become a kind of functional document after the rules and regulations and all those higher education regulatory bodies will be in place. You see, this has come after 34 years of time, right? Which means almost 1.5 generation has already gone into the old education system. I mean, old education system itself, if you look at the history of or evolution of the education policies in our country, then we had something in 1968 which was which was revised in 1986 and then came 1992. So at some or other intervals we have had some kind of changes in the policy, but this particular new education policy is very significant from two perspectives. First perspective is that because it is coming with after 34 years and with major changes in the structural functional manner and the delivery of the education as a service to the coming generation or the present generation. So from that perspective, it is very important. Second very important thing is that this was already a kind of policy intention as declared by the present government when it was contesting election in 2014. But then let it not be very important. What is more important is that it comes with a very definite kind of, definite kind of ideas for the future of education in our country. The point is, since it's only at the level of the policy statements, one does not know how it is going to happen. And in 34 years of time, the structures and the functions are so well entrenched into the system that it will take at least 2 to 3 years time before actually we can see the implementation of the present policy document in letter and spirit. So I believe I'll give myself at least 2 to 3 years time, or it's all again the political and administrative will of the people who are going to be there at the helm. The structures will have to be created. The curriculum will have to be in place, because this is actually a very revolutionary kind of thing which is happening. Many things will have to be continued from the past, because you cannot overnight have something from black to white or from white to black. It will have to be passing through some kind of transition before the new structure will be in place. So answering your question, I think it will take at least a while, 2 to 3 years time, before we actually see the present NEP 2020 in letter and spirit being implemented.
Sure, sir. It looks like the policy looks very promising for you. So we will move on to the next question.
Continuing with your previous statement, I'm looking at this policy as a policy statement, and I'm not ascribing any value to this. You see, any policy is as good as it is implemented, or as bad as it is not implemented. We have had not only education policy, we have had fabulous policies in the design and construct of it, but they all have fallen flat on their faces because we have not been able to implement it properly. So policy from the design perspective looks very good, but point is when it comes to the implementation, the actual operational aspect of the policy, and if you have not been able to create the proper structures and functions for operationalizing anything, this becomes a kind of, an exercise in vain. So from my perspective, whether this is going to be promising in future or not will all depend on with what kind of commitment we are actually designing the nuts and bolts of the implementation mechanism. Now coming to the GDP, 6% of the GDP. I mean, why 6%? I believe India at the present juncture requires more than 6% of the total expenditure on education as critical input as education. You see, it's 1.6% or 1.4% at this point in time. I think it should go beyond this. It's all about prioritizing your expenditure in the GDP. You are creating the cadre for the future. So if you want to create and if you want to actually reap the benefit of the demographic dividend, and I believe this particular policy basically is looking at two very important aspects of the future. One is demographic dividend, and second is India's commitment to goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which pertains to education. So from these two perspectives, I believe 6%, at least 6% is definitely needed, if not more. But point is, where is it going to be actually located? Is it still going to be taking care of the infrastructure and cost? Of course, we need to spend more than that. So I believe this 6% should be definitely allocated for the operational aspect of the new education policy, and additional few more percentages of GDP should be there to create the infrastructural support for the 6% of the GDP to be there. And as regards the economic slowdown and all those kind of things are concerned, I believe yes, because of the pandemic and corona issue, we may be facing the heat for next 2 years maybe. But then new education policy is going to be there for a long time. So if you start preparing for that, and in the meantime, the government, I'm sure, is looking at multi-pronged efforts to overcome the economic slowdown. It can be overcome. I'm sure about the pandemic. I'm not too much bothered about the pandemic and the economic slowdown, because as an educationist, as somebody who has been in the field of education for almost 2.5 decades now, I feel that any expenditure from the GDP on the education is actually looking at impacting so many generations in future, right? So from that perspective, I believe 6% of the GDP is good enough, if not more. I mean, I'll always ask for more, but then we may not be spending the entire 6% right from the beginning. We can begin in a slow and gradual manner. Right now, if it is 1.48% or something, we can take it to 3% or maybe 4%, and then as we are overcoming the impacts of economic slowdown, we will be in a position to increase the share of the GDP in education. This is what I had to say about this particular part. Please go ahead.
Sure, sir. So the next question.
Let me introduce these concepts like Education 4.0 and Education 4.0, which must correspond to the needs of the industry. When the old education policy in the first generation or second generation, they were unrolled, I believe we were still passing through the education industry 3.0. And then the education system had to be geared or had to be designed according to the needs of the industry 3.0. Now point is we have moved from there, and these are the times when you actually need a candidate who specializes in a particular subject area or specialization area, but who also has all-round, understanding of various things. So technology is not value neutral, if that is the premise. Then how do you understand the same technology from multiple disciplinary perspective? This is a simple question. So somebody who is actually doing technology, and I'm not hinting at somebody who is only doing mechanical engineering or engineering some kind of course. I'm talking about the social science students. Shouldn't they also be understanding how technology is impacting the social sciences and humanities? Why multilingualism is very important when you have to understand the worldview in a much integrated manner. So I think KSA, knowledge, skill and aptitude of the student, which is well grounded in 360-degree manner, is going to be the right kind of candidate for any recruiter in the country or abroad who will be able to understand the different kind of worldviews. I believe the new education policy, if, I'm using this word if, because one has no clue as to how this particular liberal-oriented, liberal-approached education system is going to be unrolled. It's possible that we have made a mess of it, as we have made a mess of many other things. But point is, 4-year multidisciplinary bachelor's program for any subject which gives the grounding in different kind of disciplines and also create some kind of specialization among the students. I believe they are the employees of the future. So I'm sure the recruiter's perspective will also change because how do you, for an example, how do you look at the combination of artificial intelligence or virtual reality in the field of public policy? I mean, this is the question which I keep asking or which I keep deliberating on. Now, these are the two things coming from two different worlds, but then it has lots of givability to each other, lots of supplementing effort to each other, and so is the management, so is the history, so is politics, so is geography or regional development. So, point is, if a recruiter gets somebody who specializes in a particular aspect, but who is also looking at he's also looking at the candidates' almost versatility in terms of the knowledge. I'm sure the recruiters are going to be very happy because worldwide the recruiters are also looking at not only from the conservative perspective but also from the versatility point of view, that is the candidate who is coming in ready to jump on the first day. That's the question. So from that perspective, I believe hiring of the candidate will have to be very, very on a very different note. I mean, look at the entire team of Steve Jobs who were designing iPhone 10. These people came from the liberal studies background. These people came from multiple disciplinary background, you see. Look at the solar policy which was designed in Germany. Now, the people who come as a part of the stakeholders team in solar, designing the solar policy, they come from diverse disciplines, you see. And the government is very happy to put them on board because no policy or no education can be limited to a single discipline. You could specialize in one discipline, but it has to be, the perspectives have to be multidisciplinary. I mean, I'm a student of political science. Perfectly all right. But then I have also studied many other disciplines. So these disciplinary boundaries, which we call silos, where the education policies have, condemned us to be limited to, needs to be broken. Because unless until we connect with the disciplines, our own discipline in the first place will not be enriched, and secondly, will not be able to be connected to the world in a meaningful manner, and that is the purpose of the education. Education must not be used with the blinkers. education must remove your blinkers. So point is, if those blinkers are there because of the disciplinary boundaries, then what purpose is it serving? That's my plain and simple question. So I feel this particular education policy may be helpful in removing those kind of knowledge-based blinkers. And this also talks about some kind of professional course, vocational course, etc. Though I'll have my own reservations on the professional and vocational courses beginning at such an early age in the schooling system. But at a later stage, possibly one can look at from a very, very positive perspective. What kind of skill needs to be given, what kind of professionalism needs to be built, all these needs to be thought out in a much rigorous manner rather than giving a very cursory look and, just doing something in the name, just because you have said that you would want to do. So it needs to be a well thought out, rolling on plan rather than something which has been done in a haste. Yeah, so I believe that the recruiters and the job market will also align itself along the changing times. In your own discipline, say management education, now IIT Kozhikode has come out with management degree in liberal arts pedagogy. I'm sure, there must be a very well thought out kind of vision which must be directing them towards coming out with those kind of things. And at the same time, you also have conventional management institutions in this country, and then you have these kind of institutions which provide you education in sociology and psychology and everything from the core perspective, and then they teach you management. So, I mean, I'm sure, these kind of developments which are happening are actually coming also as a kind of demand from the recruiter side. So I feel new education policy might do some kind of justice to the requirements of the recruiters also. So this is what I had to say. Yeah. You can go ahead with the next question.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, certainly, and this is much needed, you see. What we have done, two things I feel pained in the present times. The first thing is that people are most of the students are after the marks, you see. Mm-hmm. Everybody who comes to me as my student, so, how many marks I'm going to be getting or what kind of question paper are you going to be setting. Point is, there are examination systems in our country which will give you 10 questions, out of which 5 questions have to be answered, and one would look at those last 10 years question paper and you just prepare intelligently some 10 questions and there are 5 questions. And how do you prepare? You prepare by writing the class notes, and in the school also the focus is more on underlining the passages rather than learning and imbibing the lessons of those passages, you see. So unless until we disconnect the marks from the knowledge and knowledge for the sake of application, this particular system for the future of India is not going to be very good. So voting has happened not because we wanted it that way, but because the assessment systems have become like that. So that is the worst thing that we have done to the generation in last 1.5 or 2 generations in the past. That unless until you have secured this much marks by voting, and then teachers also have been trained to look at the words which they have used in the class, if that can be seen in the notebooks or not. If somebody has actually written everything verbatim from the class notes, she or he gets full marks. Otherwise, if you have tried to reinterpret it, then obviously it's a problem for you. This particular aspect of the education system, I'm sure this education system, the new education policy is definitely going to change, and it better changes for good of the students, because all-round learning and learning by self is never going to happen. So marks-based assessment system, which is supported by voting as a method, is definitely not good for for the students. And what for, basically? Ultimately, if you're not able to apply something in the real life situation, then why are we actually taking the assessments, and why? I mean, there is a serious problem with the teaching learning method in our context. And I believe that needs to be changed. This particular education policy, I'm sure, is going to be giving us a different direction, and definite direction in changing from the rote method and the teaching learning method. My only concern is that, and that is a fear that I have, that where are we going to be getting these kind of teachers, and the entire generation who has been product of the old education system, how are we going to change their mindset to become a new generation teacher according to the requirements of the essence of this new education policy for 2020. So if we are not able to fulfill that need, then it could lead to a different kind of chaos in the country, you see, where you neither have new education policy, nor people are getting into the old education policy, because the teachers who are going to be teaching in the new education policy, they themselves are fighting their own battles, you see, because they also have been trained in the old manner. This has come, this has been there for last 34 years, right? So people are so matured with the whole old way of teaching learning that they'll have to change the entire personality to be a new kind of teacher. So this is the challenge, and these are the kind of things that are going to be there for future. So this is what I have to say.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate your thoughts and taking a time for us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.